This is the Hiking Through Life podcast. We've all been gifted a journey called life. Let's see where the journey leads us today. Welcome to the Hiking Through Life podcast. I'm Andy.
And I'm Sarah.
And on today's journey, we talk with Ruth Wikoff-Jones.
She is someone who discovered hiking later on in life and kind of stumbled upon it because of a trip she went on with her son's Boy Scout troop. And it was really awesome to interview Ruth because it was a reminder that no matter your age, no matter your stage in life, you can get into hiking. There's really nothing that holds anyone back at any time. And I mean, she was kind of a reminder of that.
And there is a place for everyone out there in the wilderness, no matter your age, race, gender.
Yeah, so she was a really inspiring person to talk to about her journey. And we also talk about how she is a leader in the outdoors field through Women Through Hike. She is a co-ambassador for Women Through Hike. And she's very involved in planning hikes with that and leading groups of people. And
she's also a big advocate for getting outdoors in general and continuing to learn. She talks a little bit about that with her not only outdoor adventuring, but some of her career as well.
Hearing that she's a big advocate for always picking up trash when out on the trails is really awesome too. And it's so easy for people to do. I've started doing it on walks way more often ever since I talked to her because it's just like, well, duh, why wouldn't you?
So after listening to this podcast, go check out her blog, Ruth's Blue Marble. So sit back now and enjoy the podcast.
Today we are joined on our podcast by Ruth Wikoff-Jones, and we're really excited to have her on. Ruth has a large amount of experience in the outdoors. She's been involved in the Boy Scouts of America. She's done solo backpacking. She blogs on Ruth's Blue Marble, and she is also a co-ambassador of Women Who Hike in the Minnesota chapter. So we're super excited to have her on and share all of her knowledge about outdoors and life. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ruth.
Hi, Sarah. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So Ruth, your blog kind of shares that like you got into backpacking later on in life, and it sounds like the big part that got you into backpacking is when you went on a Boy Scout trip in 2014.
Yeah. So I have one child, my son, who's now graduated and off at college. But I've actually been a scout leader since about 2008 when he got involved in scouting. Mostly kind of behind the scenes. And then when he got involved with Boy Scouts specifically, an opportunity came up for him to go to Philmont Boy Scout Ranch in New Mexico. It's a high adventure camp, and it's considered like a pinnacle trip for a lot of scouts. Not every scout goes, and it's a really big deal. And they needed adult advisors. So my ex-husband and I kind of arm wrestled over who would get to go, and ultimately I was the one that got to go along with him. And the prep for that, which was about 9 months, was really kind of my first introduction to hiking and backpacking. When I was growing up, the outdoors were part of my life, but not in that way. It was more like walks around the park, and I wasn't real athletic. So it was a total crazy thing to take on.
Did you ever camp at all growing up?
No. I grew up in a family where we actually had a family member that had a physical disability that made it really hard to do that kind of stuff. We did road trips, and I'm a huge fan of road trips. So I just kind of thought, well, this would probably be like a road trip on your feet, you know. In retrospect, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. We started training. We'd do 5-mile hikes, and we worked up to 10 miles, and we'd only hike maybe once a month. And then about 6 months into it, we did a 47-mile section of the Superior Hiking Trail in 5 days. And I think that was when I was really like, whoa, I think I don't know what I'm really doing here. But everybody it was great. The boys were great, and the two adult leaders that I did the trip with were amazing. One of them, a gentleman who is the current scoutmaster of the troop that I'm still involved with. He had gone to Philmont as a youth, and then he was going back as an adult. So he had a lot of experience. And then there was another mom, which was an interesting dynamic too, because usually it's dads and their sons. There was another mom who was going as well. She had two sons that were going on the trip. And she had 2 years before that done a trip with Scouts to Glacier National Park. So she had a little bit more experience as well. So I had those two to kind of help me find my way. And as I did more, I got more confident, and we ultimately ended up spending it's a 12-day trek, but you spend 10 days in the backcountry at Philmont, and a good chunk of what we did was in the Valle Vidal, which is in the far north part of New Mexico, almost to the Colorado border, so in the mountains. You hike for like 3 or 4 days with all of your gear. You get a food refresh, and then you go for another 3 or 4 days, and you're pretty much on your own. There's camps where you do activities and everything. But in the end, I put 117 miles on my boots for a 67-mile trek. So it was
really
crazy.
awesome.
It was crazy. And when we got back, there was actually a point early in the trip where we were standing on kind of the first ridge line that we were crossing, and I had this moment where I looked at my then 14-year-old son, and I'm like, I can't believe I have let my fear of doing things hold me back, and I'm not going to do that again, because the view was amazing where we were standing, and I'm like, I want more of this. I want more of this all the time. So it changed how I thought about the outdoors. It changed how I thought about my abilities. It changed how I thought about hiking and backpacking, and I fell in love.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just so much I love about that story in itself, because like here you are getting into something, leading a group of teenage boys on this trek. And I mean, you've never done anything like that. So, I mean, to lead a group of people when you've never done something, I think you wrote something on your blog. It was like, I learned perseverance when I was at Philmont, to know you've taken something on that's totally out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, well, and the funny part is that really, when I say lead, our group, there's different ways to approach Philmont, and every crew that goes does it a little bit differently. But our group really approached it from the perspective that the adults were there as advisors. Our job was to make sure that nobody died. Nobody did anything that they were going to not or be injured. We had a joke that like the worst thing on your outdoor resume is to have last known location of your body. So we didn't really do, like, when it came to deciding our path to get from one place to the next on every day, who was going to lead the wayfinding, that was with the boys. They were the ones doing it, and the three of us adults were just kind of along to make sure that everything went all right. If there were conflicts in personalities and that kind of stuff, which happens when you're in a group situation, in backcountry hiking, there are group dynamics that start happening, and every group happens a little bit differently, but you will have points where the group starts breaking down, where there's infighting, that kind of stuff. And we had kind of gotten through that on our Superior Hiking Trail trip, so that when we got to Philmont, we were like a well-oiled machine. I mean, everybody had their job, everybody knew what their job was, and it really made it a really great experience. The one thing I discovered coming off of that, The scouts had to hang a bear bag every day. I never learned how to do that. Um, the scouts had to put up, like a rain fly, and um, there were other tasks that they had to do navigation wise. I didn't learn how to do any of that. So I was just kind of along for the ride.
Right.
Which now I've spent a lot of time I've spent a lot of time taking the time to try to learn some of those skills, because now I spend quite a bit of time in the outdoors, solo. I do the work that I do with women who hike. I do some things with scouts, but really, the things that I've done since then, the big adventures that I've had, have been solo. And I realized after that trip that there were some skills I didn't have, and I still have them. I'm still working on my navigational skills. I'm still working on my knot tying, because they're all skills that if you don't use, you lose them. So that's where leading some of these other groups is helpful, is because then I get to practice them and I get to show people um, those skills. And in doing that, there's a method called the edge method in scouting. It's basically teaching. It's the idea that you learn by teaching. You watch it happen, you try it yourself, and then you teach someone else. And that's been huge for me in my own outdoor adventures now.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna learn best when you're doing it, of course. That's like a huge part of learning through hiking, backpacking, and through anything else, I think, too. But I just love how that kind of evolved for you through a Boy Scout troop. And I also love that you said there was only you and one other woman out there, which is so uncommon in the Boy Scouts.
Oh, absolutely. We actually had a situation towards the end of our trek. We were so all of there are shower facilities at some of the camps, and we were at our last camp, and Cheryl and I decided to go get showers instead of doing shooting sports with boys. And we were waiting because all of the facilities are still really set up. They're getting better, and I know it's improved since I was there, but it was set up for men. So we were waiting outside the showers for our turn, and this gentleman came out, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I feel really bad for you ladies, because, you had to come on this trip, and I'm sure it was just really not something that you wanted to do." And it was this whole impression that somehow we'd been forced into it. And she and I looked at each other, and we just kind of started laughing, and we're like, "No, we chose to do this. And we are so stoked to be here." I mean, it was really, I was like, wow. So there's also that, I think there's still stigma in some places around the idea that women would want to do this kind of stuff. And so that's the other thing that I really hope, in my blogging and in my just being out there, is that people see that it is definitely something that's not a gender dominated activity, and not an age dominated activity. I'll be honest, I feel sometimes really old on trail. I mean, when we did that trip, I was 47 years old. I'm 52 now. So, and when you think about getting into hiking that late in your life, I've still got a lot to learn, and I'm seeing now, I'm seeing more women now that are older hiking, um, but I also see a lot of women my age and older that are, I don't know, they seem very reluctant, because I think they're just afraid of all the things that are out there. There's this perception that women aren't safe out in the wilderness.
Oh
And
yeah.
that is something that, like, I totally want to break that down. I actually just listened to a podcast interview with a woman who had actually been stalked, and she said the only place that she felt safe was in the outdoors, away from people.
Was that the grizzly who hikes one?
Um, she explores this. I've been diving into that particular podcast, and It's an interview with a woman. No, I want to say she was living in San Francisco, and I'm
Oh, okay.
sorry, I don't know the details of it specifically, but she literally had a stalker, and she was new to the area, and she decided that she would start hiking because she felt like that way she could get away from him. And it's interesting because I get that all the time. I get it from family, I get it from women, men, about a woman being in the outdoors by herself. And I've had people tell me I need to take crav classes and all this other stuff, and I'm like, I feel safer on trail than I do getting on the bus to go to work, because there's just it's a hard place to get to in the first place. So it's not like there's some bad person out there waiting for you. The odds of that happening are very slim because it's so hard to get to some of the places where people hike.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, and like going back to the whole age thing, I think that the more women see people, well, women and men, the more women and men see people who are older in their 50s like you, that's only going to motivate more people to get out on the trail. But yeah, there is probably reluctancy of people who are an older age because they've just never done it. They know nothing about it. But people like you who are blogging about it and putting such a positive perspective on this hobby and leading a group, I mean, the world needs people like you.
Well, that's good to hear. I think so too. I think, if I can inspire one person to make that choice, and it has been interesting, um, as I've gotten involved with women who hike, which I was a Christmas present to myself 2 years ago. I was like, okay, I know there's got to be hiking groups for women out there. And I did a little research, and at that time, I found women who hike, and then I also discovered the 52 Hike Challenge. And getting involved with both of those was my Christmas present to myself. I had, at that point in time too, I had done my Isle Royale solo backpacking trip. So um, I felt like I needed another challenge. And through Women Who Hike, when I started, I was just a member. The local chapter was just getting started. There were a couple of us that were super active, and there was actually three of us that kind of always seemed to end up leading things. And then when we hit critical mass with the Facebook page, where Nicole Brown, the founder, felt like it was time to have a chapter and have ambassadors, um, I debated about applying for it. And at the time, unfortunately, I had a family member that was very ill and we knew was probably going to pass away. So I made a choice to not apply. But I encouraged the other two to, I'm like, are you guys going to do it? And they're like, well, yeah, we did. That ended up being Jen Tyson and Carrie, who she ultimately ended up going back to school and stepping down. And when she did, Jen called me and she's like, I want to do this with you. And I think you would be awesome. And I was flattered. So Jen and I talked with Nicole and we got set up, and we've been going strong for just a little over a year as a team, working on the official hikes and then being support to our Facebook page.
Well, and to be an ambassador, I mean, you have to be in such a leadership role. So I'm guessing that you also do like leadership roles in your professional life as well, or is a leadership just kind of a passion project of yours?
Well, yeah, I come from a family, I guess, of the way I would put it is servant leadership. And so it's always kind of been there in my DNA. My past jobs have always had some sort of leadership component to them. I work in the events industry. I worked doing nonprofit events for probably about 12 years, and then about 15 years ago, I decided to go on the corporate side of things. So I get to plan some pretty epic trips for companies to reward their employees, and I've been able to go on some pretty epic trips as well, to research for that.
Yeah, I
But
saw through your blog you got to like do some hikes internationally too when you were out
yeah,
working. Like, what a cool
yeah,
perk.
yeah. Well, last year I got to go to the tip of South Africa, and I got to go to the tip of South America all in 1 year, like bucket list trips. Those trips, I mean, they sound really awesome. Like I went to Patagonia, and it was a 5 day trip. One day, it takes you one full day, almost a day and a half, to get from Minnesota to Patagonia to Torres del Paine National Park, because in like 3 planes and a bus, and it's a long trip. But my job is to go and take a look at hotels and venues that we would send our clients to, and then participate in activities that they might do. So that was a pretty epic trip, and I managed to beg the company that was hosting us to let me walk from the glacier the glacier trip that we did back to the hotel, which was so awesome. And they're like, "Well, you seem like you'd be able." I'm like, "There's the trail right there." I'm like pointing it out, and everybody else is like, "I don't see a trail there." I'm like, "No, there's flagged and everything." So like they paint rocks orange on the ground, which is different from like here in Minnesota, you get the blue blazes. There it's orange blazes on rocks on the ground. I'm like, I'm totally fine. I will totally be able to find my way. So that was pretty awesome. And then in South Africa, I got to do some stuff too. But through that position that I have, back to your question about leadership, the position that I have is particularly unique in that part of my job is helping to win new business for new clients. So it requires a different set of skills than just being able to find hotels and pick out venues and that kind of stuff. And as I was getting into the industry, I got involved with an association called the International Live Events Association. The acronym is ILEA. And through that, over the last, I think I've been a member 15 or 16 years. It's been a while.
Well, yeah, I mean, your email has so many things written under it. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. So when I was getting involved in the events industry, I didn't know anything really about it. I kind of fell into it by accident. And so I looked for, again, it was one of those, I'm like, okay, how do I learn about this? And so I got involved with the association. And over that span of time, I've served on, there's a local chapter here in Minnesota. I've served on the local chapter board of directors twice. And I am on my first year of one committee, but I've served on 3 international leadership committees for that association as well. And in all of them, all of these situations, be it that or Women Who Hike or scouting, they've all been opportunities where not only is it something where there's an opportunity for me to share knowledge with people, it's also been an opportunity for me to gain knowledge. And every time I've approached one of those, it was always from the perspective of learning. What can I learn from this? And ultimately, apparently, people seem to think I have some leadership skills. So there you go. I'm pretty self-effacing about it. But I feel like I get so much from it that I feel like it's really important to give back to it.
Yeah, and I just think that's such a cool thing that you're doing it in professional life and through this huge hobby. And yeah, like I said, your email and all of your different titles are just crazy to me. It's awesome though. It's very, very ambitious. And I love too that you see it as like you're always learning something when you go to these events. And I think those are huge qualities of a leader.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I really do. I think I come from a background, like I said, I work in nonprofits, and I worked a lot with volunteers during my time doing that work. And I always felt like volunteering was a great way to learn. When I was doing the nonprofit work, I would volunteer, and I got a lot of jobs that way. So as I've gotten involved in the outdoors community, again, it's that whole idea of volunteering. I volunteer every year as part of National Public Lands Day with the National Park Service and Mississippi Connection to do projects. And most of the projects, fortunately, have been not far from my home. I live fairly close to Fort Snelling and Coldwater Spring and Minnehaha Falls. So those are kind of my home parks, and a lot of the work I've done is there. But now I'm also thinking about ways that I can maybe do trail crew somewhere and do a little more significant work for trails that are used by everyone, but specifically by hikers and backpackers. And we've got a wealth of that here in Minnesota. We've got a ton of opportunities for that with all the trails that we have that go through the state.
Well, and as being ambassador for Women Who Hike, is like picking up trash or anything ever part of the Women Who Hike groups?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Jen and I it's funny, we've talked about it. Like if we schedule a trail cleanup, on most of the national cleanup days, we are going to have a snowstorm. Like almost every time we've scheduled something, the days that we've scheduled it have been most national efforts like that, which Women Who Hike participates in, are usually in the early spring, like March, April, and then like September, October. And that can be a challenge. Like we scheduled a hike last March at Maplewood State Park, which, oh my gosh, if you've never been, it's absolutely gorgeous. We scheduled a cleanup hike in April, and it was that Friday, the worst snowstorm that we had of the whole winter came through, if I remember right. It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. Like Jen and I are on the phone, like, are we going to drive out there? Are we going to go? Because we had gotten a camper cabin the night before, and we couldn't do our cleanup hike because it was snowing. But then in the fall, we did another one, and that was hugely successful. We did it at Minnehaha Falls, and we pulled out about 132 pounds of garbage in about 3 hours with a group there. And then for me personally, I've made it a commitment to myself that I always carry what this gal Brittany is doing a project called the 11th Essential, and she's actually working on getting nonprofit status for it. But she, that idea of that 11th Essential being something to collect garbage in. Now, I've got a fancy Deuter dirt bag that I got from the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, but it could be a bread bag. It could be an empty shopping bag, just having something along to be able to pick up garbage. And it's really interesting to watch the reaction of people as you're doing it. Like I used to be kind of self-conscious about it. Now I'm like, whatever, I'm just gonna pick up garbage whenever I'm out.
Yeah, I mean, it's our earth. We should be taking care of it. So the fact that people are kind of looking at you like you're crazy is like, well, no, I'm helping our planet, so you're going to live longer.
Yeah, exactly. And don't you really kind of want to be out here and not see like empty beer cans and snack wrappers? I mean, it's also about that. For me, it's the cleaning up the garbage, keeping our planet healthy, and then also letting other people have the same kind of experience in the outdoors that is this wonder and awe of nature. And when I find garbage, it makes me feel like it's a place that's too accessible. Like it's not I don't know, it's not far enough away from civilization, if that's the case. And many places aren't really that far from civilization, that are remote. Like when I think about the Superior Hiking Trail, you can get on and off the Superior Hiking Trail at so many places. Like it's so easy to get back to civilization, really.
Yeah.
But when you're on trail, to have that sense that you're away from civilization and that you're in this place that is truly wild is really important to me. And I think it's really important to all of us that spend time on the trail, and to be able to have that sense of wonder and to share that with somebody or to leave it that way, I can't imagine doing anything else. It just, and it blows my mind, the stuff that people leave behind in the woods. It's just crazy.
I know. I'm always just shocked when I see clothes left behind.
Oh yeah. Oh, you should come on a cleanup hike over at Minnehaha Falls. I guarantee you there will be clothes every single time. We found, like, what was it, the last time we found somebody's like Jimmy Choo shoes. Like, who has Jimmy Choo shoes that, first of all, they can afford to just dump in, the woods, and who goes to Minnehaha Falls down on the trail in Jimmy Choos? This is crazy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's nuts. So back to like the whole woman who hike. So how do people get involved in that? Do you have to be a member in order to come to these hikes? How does that work?
This is like my favorite thing ever. So Women Who Hike is actually becoming an international organization. You can find out more on womenwhohike.com. That's the main website. And then you can also join any of the Women Who Hike Facebook pages. You do need to request to join because they're closed groups, and we do limit it to individuals who identify as women. And we do actually kind of do a little profile search. You can be on the Facebook pages without being a member of Women Who Hike. Being a member of Women Who Hike gets you a little series of extra benefits. You get access to specially planned hikes that we do all over the country. So there are ambassadors in every state, and they plan about 4 to 6 hikes annually that are exclusive to Women Who Hike members. Some of them have included backpacking in the Sierras. We've had hiking at Arches National Park, sections of the AT. Like I said, Jen and I have done a couple that have been a little bit more special. We typically limit the number of people that can attend so that we make sure we're following L&T practices. And sometimes we'll have swag. Some of the hikes, like Meryl will bring boots to test out, or like when we did our cleanup hike last year at Maplewood, we were able to get Deuter dirt bags for everybody that attended. So it just really kind of depends. But along with that, you also get an awesome Women Who Hike sticker that you can put wherever you want, and a Women Who Hike patch. And it's really inexpensive. It's a lifetime membership for $16, which is, I mean, like, there's not many people that can't afford that. And then with the Facebook pages, we do, our members on the Facebook pages can do meetup hikes whenever they want. So I think we've got just about 2,500 members in the Minnesota chapter Facebook group. On any given day, there'll be 3 or 4 ladies that'll do a shout out and say, hey, anybody want to go for a hike today or this weekend? And they set up a hike, and anybody that wants to go can go. And it's been really great, especially in a state as big as we are, because we have some members that are up, Duluth and the North Shore. We've got some that are out in northwestern Minnesota, some in southern Minnesota. So it's a way for those ladies to connect in a very safe environment. They can post about where they're going and who they're going to meet up with, and know that it's not going to be public, which allows for us to also have safety in that. And Jen and I have been known to drive pretty far for some hikes to meet up with ladies. I think the farthest I've ever driven was like 3 hours for a meetup hike.
Wow, and that's one that was just like posted out on Facebook?
Yeah, somebody posted it out on the Facebook page and said, hey, and I don't remember where it was, but I was like, that's a state park I haven't been to. Rock on. I think I can get myself there. And I've even been known to, like, even if it's a distance, like I'll book a campsite at the state park the night before and drive so that like the next morning I'm ready to go, because I'm not really a morning person. So it's better if I'm like right there. But yeah, it's pretty awesome. And in the winter, a lot of the ladies snowshoe if the conditions are good. But we've got ladies that'll go out and hike too. This last weekend, one of the gals wanted to try out a park, um, one of the county parks west of the cities, and she put out a note, and it ended up just being the two of us that went. But she set up an event and set a time and a place, and we met, and we hiked for like 3 hours. I had my snowshoes on and she didn't, but we were able to, just hang out, and it's great. It's just an opportunity to get out there, and the conversations that we have are just awesome. I mean, it's everything from our concerns and our worries to sharing our joys and our excitement about things, and it's just such a great way to support each other and getting out there.
Well, I think that's super cool too, because it's like you also think about it. You're hiking with a total stranger that you've never met, yet by the end of your hike, you guys are like best friends. And I've experienced that out in the woods too. And I think that's so
Right.
magical that there's like this social media group out there to do that for women only.
Right. Well, and even cooler. And I am like, when I'm on trail with our ladies here in Minnesota, I like scream it from the rooftops practically. Um, 2 years ago, right after I joined Women Who Hike, I had a business trip out to Denver, and I was like, oh, I'm going to Denver. I've never hiked in Colorado before, but like, I don't know where to go, and I won't have a car. So I joined the Women Who Hike Facebook group in Colorado, met up with this gal, Renee, who was just amazing. She didn't even live in Denver. She drove into Denver. She picked me up, and we went for a hike, and it was really cute because when she picked me up, she's like, oh my God, I have to tell you, I have like so much anxiety around this because like this is my first hike with somebody from the group, and I'm really nervous. And I'm looking at her going like, okay, your first hike is with a total stranger, not only a total stranger, but a total stranger from another state. So I was like, you know what? We're just going to agree that if either one of us feels uncomfortable, you speak up, and like you can drop me on the side of the road and I'll be fine. But it was awesome. And since then, I have hooked up with a couple ladies in Indiana because I've been going back and forth to Indiana. My son's going to school there. And I now have Ann and Hannah, who are my hiking buddies in Indiana. So it's really, that part of it is really cool too. And I'm not exactly sure where it like really clicked with me about that idea of being able to travel and have somebody where you're going, at least in the US. And then all the resources that we share, like favorite hiking trails and gear, and how people hike and what kind of pace and safety and equipment. I mean, it's really cool to see what everybody shares. And I learned something from all the groups. I'm also hooked up with the Wisconsin, Illinois. Like I've got, kind of growing my group, and then obviously the ambassadors. We have our own group as well too. So it's fantastic to have that resource and know that they're there. So like I tell everybody, I'm like, oh my gosh, if somebody starts talking about they're traveling to another state, I'm like, you've got to sign up for the Women Who Hike Facebook group there. You've got to do it.
Yeah, totally. It's such an amazing resource. And for those people who don't want to go out and hike alone, like this is your answer 100%.
Right.
But
right.
So speaking of going alone, you have done lots of solo trips.
Yeah.
Do you prefer to do solo trips, or do you prefer to go out with other people?
Oh, that's a tough one. Because I think, I've been blogging about my Isle Royale trip back in 2017 that I did.
Well, and even in that one, you talk about how oftentimes you run into people and those people just lift your spirits.
Right.
So to me, it sounds like you still need those human connections, but you still like that being alone piece.
I tend to be a little bit of a loner. Like even when I go out on our group hikes, I will definitely engage with people. I try to make sure that if we've got new people on the hike, that I'm making sure that I connect with them. But ultimately, I would say I've always had a little bit of social anxiety, so it's really pushing myself to do that myself. But then, the idea of solo hiking, the thing I like about it, and it's not for everyone, um, but I'm okay with being with my own thoughts, and I find it really, it's been a really good place for me, especially in like the last 3 or 4 years. Like I said, I had a family member that we knew was declining, and it was over that time frame. We knew this person was going to be passing away, and that was part of my um, way of processing what was happening, what I knew was coming. Was that time out on trail. There was something about the movement and just being out in nature, and the ability for me to just really think about what was happening in my life, helped me to deal with that. Um, and I didn't have to like explain it to anybody. I could just deal with it. So yeah, I would say solo hiking is definitely something that I enjoy. Um, the Isle Royale trip, uh,
Was that your very first solo trip after you went on the Boy
it
Scout trip?
it was, and the funny thing is I decided on that trip. So my son and I went to Philmont in 2015, and in 2017 he had an opportunity to go back. And because I had gone the first time, his dad wanted to go with him the second time. And I was like, I'm totally down with that. Totally cool. Um, but then I was like, but I want to do some kind of epic trip again. So he and I were literally on trail in two different states at the same time. And like at that point in time, we had some pretty hard conversations. Like if something happens to either one of us, like what we were going to do. Um, but part of the reason why I did Isle Royale is because I knew there were no bears, so I wasn't gonna have to deal with bears, and I knew it was contained, and I knew the terrain would be similar to the Superior Hiking Trail on the North Shore, so it was like I had this control experiment for what that experience would be like. And ultimately, I think in the end, and I'm not quite at the end of that, I don't want to give all of it away, but I think at the end, I came to appreciate both people and the time to myself as well. The thing I like about going by myself is like I get to choose when I stop, I get to choose how fast I go. Um, I can just kind of do my own thing. Um, but I also know you can find people that you get into that groove with, and you can have that kind of experience with. And
Right.
I've definitely had that on trips. So it's just a little bit different how you approach things. I think also where you're at in any given moment in time. So as I'm looking forward to my next, what I would call my big adventure, I've also, I think, I've been working on hiking in all of the Minnesota state parks.
Yeah, and that's with your 52 state park,
Er,
52 hike challenge, right?
Well, okay, so there's two things. The 52 hike challenge was my way to make sure after I did my Isle Royale trip that I was out hiking every week. And that's what the 52 hike challenge is about. I mean, it's really about people making the commitment to get outdoors once a week and hike somewhere. And the cool thing is you get to define what it is. You get to define how you choose to do your hike, where you do it, and all that kind of thing. So I have some basic guidelines, like I want to hike a minimum of 2 miles. I prefer it be on dirt. Um, I try to go somewhere that I haven't gone before, but that's not always the case. And ultimately, it's about getting out. Um, and as I started doing that, and started visiting state parks as part of that, I started realizing I'm like, I think it's 63 hikeable state parks in Minnesota, which is insane. Most states don't have that many. And there's all kinds of ways you can do it. There's the hiking club and the passport club, which are run through the Minnesota DNR, which I'm not really participating in. Scouting got me hooked on patches, which is kind of like, it's kind of goofy, but that's my thing. So I am collecting the state park patches. So it doesn't really matter to me about the hiking club. In the hiking club, you get rewards and you can earn camping nights and you get patches there too. But really, this is just my personal goal to do that. So last year, to try to expedite my efforts, because I have a couple other long-term goals, hiking goals, I decided to take a week and I went for the farthest away state parks that I could possibly get to. So that is pretty much the northwest corner of the state. I spend time every fall up on the North Shore along Lake Superior. So I've hiked in every state park, most of them twice. So I knew I needed to head northwest, and I knew that was a long drive. So I planned a week-long road trip.
And this was solo?
Solo, yep. And I stayed in the state parks, but I drove up. I started at Bear Head Lake State Park, drove up there. It was about 2.5, 3 hour drive up there. I made a couple stops on the way, and then camped there. Hiked and camped there, and then every day I would get up, I would drive to the next state park, I'd hike, have lunch, drive to the next state park, because most people don't know, this is a little known fact about Minnesota state parks, almost every single one of them is within an hour drive of another one.
Oh yeah, I mean, I totally believe, yeah, for sure.
So with that many state parks, so it's so easy to get to them.
Yep.
So I just kept going. Like every day I would get up, I would pack up camp, I'd drive to the next park, I'd hike, and I chose to do the hiking club trails on most of them. And I did that every day for 7 days, and I ended up hiking in 15 state parks in that 7 days. The original plan was to do 2 a day, and I managed to squeeze in an extra one. My only bummer is when I squeezed in the extra one, I missed another one that now I've got to go back for. And it's kind of like out of the way. So then this summer, I'm going to do southwestern Minnesota. So I have another section of the state, and then I'll have central western Minnesota, and then I will have them all done.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
The western part, I learned a whole other, or the southern part, I learned a whole other love for the southern part when I visited some of those state parks.
Oh, yeah.
I just have this like preconceived view that it's all very flat, but like I actually found out very differently.
No, actually, that's northwest Minnesota, which was like, I don't want to be spoiler alert for people, but northwestern Minnesota, as you head west of the Boundary Waters and Voyager, it is farmland. It's flat farmland. So that was really interesting. But one of my favorite state parks up there ended up being Old Mill State Park, which is a really small one. It's right in the middle of farmland. But it's just the sweetest little, and I'm bummed I didn't camp there. It's just the sweetest little park, and it has 5 Conservation Corps buildings, or I'm just going to say structures, that are super unique. The state has 2 suspension bridges. One of them is at Jay Cook State Park. It's a long one. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. The other one is at Old Mill, and it's just this short little, but they look almost like they're identical, just different scale, which is so cool. And then there's all these towers. So I'm totally into that too. And I've totally come to a different appreciation of the work that the Conservation Corps did in developing not just the Minnesota state parks, but national parks. I mean, that effort gave us a lot of the public lands that we all get to enjoy today. And to have so many of those places here in the state is really cool. And they're all so unique. Every park is got its own special thing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They totally do. And that's what I love about like just having your own little challenges. You like get excited about going to them and checking them off, and it's a good reason to go explore more.
Yeah. Oh, I could go on for days about each one. And the other one that's really cool, I think, and I didn't understand, going the idea of the terrain of Minnesota. There's a 500 square mile bog in the middle of the northwestern part of the state. And there's it's called Big Bog State Park, and there's a trail. It is the hiking club trail that goes a mile out into the bog. And I remember when I was doing that, they're like, you could see moose out here and all that kind of stuff. And I'm on the trail and I'm like, I am a mile out in the middle of a bog. What do I do if a moose comes across the boardwalk? I don't know what to do. What do I hide behind? There's nothing to hide behind.
Yeah.
So, but it was amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So there's so much of it that's really cool. So the other thing that about getting into hiking that has been a really fantastic, I guess, benefit is it's got me thinking a lot about the impact we have as humans on our environment, and what I can do, and then also the history of our lands, and really got a lot I'm contemplating around that. It's been very interesting experience.
Yeah, I think the history of our lands is a huge piece of it too. And I started thinking about that more too, because every time you go out, there is always like a little historical note about like state parks and stuff. And it's just like everything that's formed our parks is so relevant. And sometimes we don't always think about that stuff.
Right. And a lot of the lands are donated. I'm taking this part of it back to that experience at Philmont. Mm-hmm. Philmont exists because Wade Phillips, who was part of the Phillips oil family, donated 50,000 acres of land back in the late 30s and early 40s to the Boy Scouts. And then when he saw that they were doing a great job managing the land and offering these outdoor opportunities to youth, he donated another chunk of land. It ended up being almost 150,000 acres of land. And I think you see that here when you start learning about the history of the lands that you're on and the people that have donated it. But I think the piece that I see coming now is a conversation about the people that were on these lands long before they were owned. And I have so much learning to do in that space. It's a little overwhelming to think and to acknowledge that the lands really are everyone's, and that's where they came from. They don't really belong to anybody. So that land acknowledgement is really something that I've been paying more attention to as well. And I've got a ton to learn about it. I don't consider that I really know enough at all.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of us can take time to learn about. I know I can definitely learn more about that too. So I also want to touch a little bit more on your Isle Royale trip. So going out solo, it sounds like you had like a family support system back home. Were you like checking in with them daily when you were out there? Were they super, super worried about you? How did that go?
No, I wasn't checking in with them daily. And in retrospect, I wish I'd had my Garmin before I did that.
So you didn't have any?
No, I had my cell phone with me. But the interesting thing about Isle Royale is they tell you you're pretty much, if you get any service at all, it's going to be through Canada. And that's a big if. that you really are in a place where, unless you've got a satellite device, you're going to be out of communication. So I knew that going into it, and I, as part of my being a event planner, and then also coming from a family that believes in trip plans, I had established a trip plan for that adventure. And I'd done a lot of research because, like I said, I knew I was going to be out of communication for that trip.
And why did you choose 7 days?
Because I decided that I wanted to hike the length of the island. When I had decided I wanted to do it, I knew that the park is actually one of the least visited national parks in the national park system, because it's so hard to get to. It's getting easier, but it's tough. Out of Minnesota, you go out of Grand Portage, and it's like a 2.5 hour ferry ride. You can also do a float plane, and then out of Michigan, which the park actually is, its address is Michigan. There are ferries that run every day to the north end of the island. So I knew that the length of the trails was about 45 miles, and I figured that I could cover that in 5 to 6 days. When you're planning for Isle Royale, one of the things that anybody that you talk to will tell you, and it's good advice, including the National Park Service, is that you should have a buffer day, probably on both ends of your trip, because Lake Superior is a lake, but it behaves like an ocean.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, because I know you've been up there too. And if you know anything about being on the ferries, and if you were to see the ferries, they're not to diminish the captains and the boats or anything like that, but they're glorified fishing boats coming out of Minnesota. They're a little nicer coming out of Michigan. And if the weather goes bad, you can not be able to get there, or you can be stuck on the island. And there have been times that people have been stuck out on the island 2 or 3 days beyond when they thought they would be able to leave. And that's true for the float planes too. I mean, the weather plays a huge part in your ability to get there. So I knew I could probably do the hike in about 5 days, because we'd done the Superior Hiking Trail segment that I'd done in that time, and it was about the same distance. So I planned on 7 days, and the day that I went over was probably some of the worst conditions, like almost you probably shouldn't have gone kind of stuff. But that was up to the ferry captain. I now know that the ferry captain that I got is the guy that will go out in the really, really, really bad weather. Like, if I said his name to anybody that lives up on the North Shore, they're like, oh, yeah, he'll go out when the weather's really bad.
The risk taker.
I never felt unsafe, but so it takes a while to get there. It's like a 2.5 hour ride over to Wendigo, which is on the southern end. And I had made the choice that I would actually go take the ferry to Rock Harbor, which is on the Michigan end on the north end, and then hike southbound, with the idea that the ferry would be my shortest ride going home. So that's why it was 7 days. That first day I was going to hike, and we didn't get there until 8 o'clock at night because of the weather. We left Grand Portage at 9:30 in the morning, and it was a very, very long day. We got to Wendigo and dropped people off, and got almost all the way to where they round the tip of the island, because Rock Harbor's on just around the tip of the island, and the captain got called back because of the weather. There were 6 or 8 foot swells, and that part of the trip is the most dangerous, is going around the northern tip of the island in bad weather. And so he decided that we would go back to one of the ranger stations and hang out for a few hours to see if the weather would change. So one way or the other, we were not going to be getting there. So yeah, I lost a day. And then, talking about, communicating with family, at that point, I was out of communication with my family. They had my trip plan. They had, they had instructions, and my dad's a former military guy, so he's going to follow it. They had instructions, like if I didn't check in at a certain time on the date that I expected to be back to Minnesota, they were supposed to start the process of calling the Park Service and trying to find me. And they had my itinerary and everything. So from that perspective of doing it solo, I really was, I was out there. But the other thing that's interesting about Isle Royale from the solo perspective is you're not really ever out there completely on your own, because there's only so many trails. It's a 47-mile by 9-mile island. So at some point in time, you're going to run into people.
How often would you say you were running into people? It seemed like fairly often based on what I've read.
Yeah, I would say probably somewhere between every 2 to every 5 hours, I would come across someone. I was there in July, so the island's pretty busy at that time of the year. It just really varies. I mean, there are definitely trails. I went down the center of the island on the Greenstone Ridge, which I think that's kind of the traversed. If you're going to just do it and go across the island, that's the most direct route. Some people will go and do some of the side trails that go out to like McCargo Bay and some of the other places. And I had specifically chosen not to do that because I knew it would add days to my trip, and I only had that window of time off from work. But it was kind of weird. It was weird, but it was also really good to be out there and not have that communication and know that, not have that constant attention that, like people looking for you and that kind of thing. I think for my family, my mom in particular, really struggled with it. I mean, like she really struggled with the idea that I was going to be out there by myself. And I think even my son at the time, even though he was on his adventure, also really kind of struggled with that idea.
Sure, because just the summer before is when you were on the Boy Scout trip with him. Is that right?
It was 2 summers before that. Yeah. But on the flip side, I mean, that Christmas before I went to Isle Royale, he bought me the map I used for my trip. And he's like, if you're going to do this, you need a map. And this one's waterproof, which thank God, because it rained for days. But he was awesome. But I think it was also a little scary because we were both in that situation where we were not able to communicate with each other, and we weren't able to communicate with other people via technology, I guess is the way I would put it. So, and I really wasn't worried about it. Again, it was all the worries that we kind of talked about with women hiking by themselves, and would there be any bad actors out there and that kind of stuff. And I was like, I can't imagine anybody going to the effort and expense of getting to Isle Royale to do something bad to somebody else.
Exactly. I think you need to worry about a bear before that.
Yeah, or a moose. Definitely
right.
A moose.
Well, I guess not a bear since there's no bears there.
Yeah, no, the worst things you had to worry about were moose. And when I was there, like all the female moose on the island had calves like in the 6 weeks before I got there.
Oh,
so
wow.
they're like, yeah, we have about 800 really protective mamas on the island right now. So if you see one, just turn around. I was like, oh, that's great. And the year I was there was the 2 years before they reintroduced additional wolves. So there were only 2 wolves on the island at the time. But there's foxes. And so it was really more like, what little critter is going to steal my my food that was when we were at Philmont, we called them mini bears. It's like chipmunks and mice and squirrels. Those are the things you got to worry about.
Yeah, and did you have any critter issues at all?
I didn't personally, but one of my first night was, I guess it was the second night on the island. I was in a shelter with another group, and we were getting ready to kind of do lights out because it was raining. So you try to double up. The campground was totally full. It's raining, and I happened to move my backpack, and I had all my food in a bear vault, which was probably a little overkill, but it's what I had. And I moved my backpack, and a mouse went running across the floor. And I looked, and the family that I was with had all of their food like spread out all over the floor. I mean, they had it in plastic bags and everything. And they're like, well, and I'm like, you guys might want to, do you have something to put that in? And they're like, well, there are no bears here. I'm like, no, there's a tiny little one running around that's going to eat all your food in the middle of the night. So that was the only thing that really was an issue. I had one day where I had a squirrel that was, you could tell it was like, are you going to turn your back so I can steal, steal your food while you're not looking? But I didn't have that. But the rangers had told us like the fox will steal boots and books and whatever else they can, because all of them are after the salts from the sweat. And so like somebody had a library book stolen by a fox a few weeks before I was there. Like the fox ran off. Somebody ran off, another fox ran off with a boot, so they're like, just make sure anything that's like sweaty that you don't just leave it sitting around because it might disappear.
So you can't really hang up and air out your sweaty clothes at the end of the day.
Well, you can't. Yeah, you can. I mean, you can do a clothesline, or you can put them, but you just need to kind of pay attention to your surroundings. I think the boots that got stolen and the book that got stolen were probably like kind of, late at night, or somebody set it down and walked away. I didn't ever see a fox, which was I was kind of disappointed by that, but it was all good. The other thing, I think, doing that by myself too, it allowed me in those situations where like the first 2 days it was raining and the campsites that I was at had shelters. The rule of thumb is like, if you can squeeze another person in, you make room for them. So for me being by myself, I was able to squeeze in with people, whereas there were other people that had gotten off the ferry with me where it's like 2 or 3 people, and it was harder for them to find somewhere to kind of drop into because there were more people. So that was the other thing that was really kind of cool about being solo, is I had that flexibility, and it was easy for me to say, I'm just going to take up like 3 feet of space.
Yeah, that does make it nice. Mm-hmm. And then as far as like emotional struggles when you're alone, I know like when my husband was out, when he was out backpacking the Superior hiking trail by himself, he had some really like rough emotional days just by himself. He was like, why am I out here? And I know I read like something in your blog where you sat on a rock and you were just on the verge of tears after you slipped in a mud puddle.
Oh my God.
How did you overcome those emotional struggles?
Well, the thing that was really interesting about the way I did it is, in order to get home, I had to keep going. In my mind, I hadn't considered that there was any other option. There are other ways. I mean, like the ferry stops around you can schedule the ferry to drop you off at various places around the island. It isn't scheduled unless somebody has scheduled it. They don't stop unless they know they're going to be picking somebody up. But like you can, if you can get cell service on the north side of the island and you can get connected with the ferry, they can come places, because I knew that happened for a few people that I had ridden the ferry over with. But it is really interesting in seeing how that dynamic works when you're by yourself and you don't really have a choice. Because like that time that you mentioned, I was 4 days in, and I was tired of the mud, and it was a big, huge swath of mud, and my boots had finally dried out from the first few days. And I stuck my trekking pole in to kind of, test. I'm like, oh, that's kind of deep. And there was this big rock, but the angle was just not quite right. And I thought, well, I'm going to try it. And sure enough, I stepped on it. And because my boots were muddy, my foot slipped out from underneath me and I went down hard. And I overpacked. I mean, my pack was probably 40 pounds.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah. And that was mostly because of that stupid amount of food I was carrying. But I went down and I was in the water, and I had this moment where I'm like, there had been this guy that I'd seen, and I called him Mr. Surly because he was gruff, and he didn't, every time I talked to him, he's like, he kept saying, anytime I got anything out of him when I saw him on trail, he's like, well, we're doing this, and we're doing that, but he was by himself. I'm like, okay, are you just doing that because, are you by yourself, or you got somebody with you, or did something go wrong with your hiking partner, or what?
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there thinking, oh gosh, I hope that guy comes by and lifts me up. And then I was like, no, first of all, he wouldn't do it anyway. And then I'm like, I have to get myself out of this. I have to do it. And it was this moment where I was like, in that I was sat there, I cried, I got it all out, and then I was like, you can do this. And so that was really the interesting thing about kind of the emotional stuff and the psychological stuff is there comes a point where I think you realize you don't have a choice, so you keep going. And it's been interesting for me to carry that forward into the rest of my life, because I've done that. I've had times in my life where I didn't have a choice because of either circumstances I'd gotten myself into or things that had happened that impacted me, where I didn't have a choice but to keep moving forward. And it was hard, but I think on trail, again, it's one of those where you don't have a choice. You keep moving, because if you don't, somebody may or may not come along and help you out. In the wild, depending on where you are, it can be really dangerous to not keep moving. So you just get up and you keep going. But I know it's hard. I had a friend that did part of the Superior Hiking Trail probably about 4 years ago, and he was going to do it in 3 weeks, and he started having problems the first week and ended up getting off trail and taking a week off, and he didn't go back. And he said part of the problem that he had is he was engaged and he was going to be getting married, and he missed his fiance. And he said up until then he'd done all kinds of segments on the Superior Hiking Trail, and doing the through hike was kind of his last, big thing before he was going to get married. And what he ultimately realized is that wasn't meant to be, but he had to go out and do it and find out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just kind of that it's your own mind out there. You just gotta, you either push through it or, some people just learn it's not the right time to be doing it.
Yeah. Well, and I would say if you're not sure about solo backpacking, don't take off, don't do a big gigantic trip like that. I think it's better to do like a long weekend, and test it out. I had done enough hiking at that point in time by myself that I was okay with what was going on in my head. I knew the dialogue that would happen, and I knew the challenge. I maybe didn't know the specific challenges that I was going to have, but I knew that I was okay in that space, and not everybody is, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong and important perspective to have because, I just think a lot of people think the idea of it is really, really awesome to go out there by yourself. but I've never personally like gone on like a backpacking trip myself, and I don't know that I could. I'm very hesitant to do that. And just hearing like it's not for everybody is really like nice and reassuring.
Yeah, no, there's not, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think what I learned on that trip ultimately is that I in that particular type of hiking, I would probably prefer to have somebody with me. Um, the challenge for me is that first big trip. Um, it was such a tight group, and I've always said this. Those were 14 to 16-year-old boys that were leading us, and I'm like, I would trust them with my life, and I said that back then. And I think that's the thing that is. I don't know if I don't want to say it's the biggest challenge, but for me, it's the thing to wrap my head around is I like being with someone that can allow me to be in my own headspace for a while and doesn't need the constant dialogue. I just had this conversation with another hiker, and we talked about it. It's like to find that person that kind of understands that need to be in your own space, but that you can still have that fellowship with on trail, I think is a really cool thing to find when you find it. And I haven't found it since then. I think that first experience was probably so magical, at least for me, that I'm going to compare everything to that, including my hiking partners, which is a pretty tall order to ask of people.
Yeah, but I mean, it was like your first big experience that got you into this whole amazing experience that you're doing now. Yep. So I think it's fair that you keep going back to compare it to that experience with the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, and I'm also trying to open myself to the possibilities. Like, I did my road trip last year as a solo, but it was actually funny. I knew that there was someone from Women Who Hike that was going to be kind of up in that same area, hiking and camping at the same time. And for whatever reason, I couldn't get whoever it was. I couldn't figure out who it was in the group. And so I was I pulled into Lake Bemidji State Park, and it was my day hike. I was going to be going and camping somewhere else. And I'm getting my boots on and getting my stuff together out of the car. And I happened to turn, and there was a woman with her dog walking past me, and she had a Women Who Hike sticker on her backpack. And so I called out to her, and we discovered that we both had at least touched base through the Facebook group. And she was trying to find the trail that I was going to be hiking on. I'm like, oh, well, I think it's over here. So we ended up hiking together, which was awesome. And she's got a little trailer that she let me, told me where she was camping. And before I left the campground, I was like, I got to go look at her trailer, because that's like on my bucket list of things to get. And we hiked together. And then the next day at the park that I'd gone to, we talked about, my trip and my plan and everything. The next day I did the hiking club trail, and that was my last day before I was heading home, or my last hike before I was going home. And I got done with the hike, and I was coming off the trail into the campground, and there she was with her dog. So she was like, you told me this one was pretty close, so I just thought I'd come over and hike here. And I'm like, oh, bummer. So this year, with my week-long trip, I reached out. There's like 2 or 3 ladies from the group that I've gotten to know, and I reached out to them, and I'm like, FYI, here's my dates. Here's my itinerary, because I've got it all booked out. And if you want to join me at any point during this, you're welcome to. And I think that would be awesome. Well, it turns out she's going to try to join me on the front end of the trip, because I think there's like 2 of the state parks maybe that she hasn't been to, because she's trying to do the same thing I am, where she's trying to hike in all the state parks. She's a little farther ahead than I am. So that's going to be awesome. I think it'll be really cool. So I'm trying to open myself up to that experience and offering that fellowship up to fellow hikers.
I think that's really cool. And especially when you can find those people that you think you mesh really well with.
Mhm.
Why not?
Yeah. Well, that's been the great thing about the women who hike group, and as I watch the women in the group start finding hiking partners. Because that's the one thing that I see over and over and over again, and it doesn't matter which one of the state groups it is. It's like, oh, I want to find people, I don't have any friends that like hiking. I have friends that think I'm crazy for doing this. I don't know how to meet up with people. And I'm like, well, you just joined the group for it. Just put yourself out there and you're going to find somebody. And
Totally.
it will be awesome. It'll be fantastic.
Yeah. One thing we haven't touched on is, where did your blog name come from? Ruth's Blue Marble. What's that
Uh,
about?
so the longer story is that name, as a business of mine, has been around for a while. I came actually out of an arts background and then got into event planning, so it came along with the arts component of it. Um, but the idea behind the name was always about um, the blue marble being the earth, like being this fantastic ball floating out in space that we all get to hang out on, and the idea of exploring that. So that's really ultimately where the name came from.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And now I'm seeing at the very bottom, your Blue Marble Books proprietor brings me to your Etsy
Yeah,
page. So
which
did you
which I
used to,
used I used to do that. I haven't anymore, and it's actually that's as my life has progressed. I used to make handmade books and journals and sell those in addition to working a full-time job. I always have some side gig going. Um,
that's how you
and
keep life exciting.
yeah, and it allowed me the creativity and that sort of thing. But it's a very time-consuming thing, and I'm kind of at a crossroads with that particular part of my life because I have a pretty significant investment in the equipment and the materials, and I'm trying to decide if I'm going to reboot that or if I'm going to put the equipment and materials up for sale. So to be determined on that one.
Hmm. Well, I like where the name came from. I like that idea that you're just kind of, people are floating around and we have this perspective, and yeah, that's a
Yeah.
really,
Yeah, and we have such a beautiful planet. It's so remarkable, and there's so many amazing things to explore. So it's funny because the name came from one place, but it felt right. It just felt right for the blog, and for the way that I feel about what I'm writing about on the blog. Um, I think the blog is really about trying to share my experiences because I find on a lot of the hikes that I do with groups and other people, and as I've gotten into it, even with my colleagues at work, it's a way for me to share the stories around that. And I hope in doing that, that I don't know if normalize is the right word, but it feels like that I want to normalize the idea that um, being in the outdoors and being a woman in the outdoors, being an over 50 woman in the outdoors is normal, and it's okay. And just because somebody doesn't want to do it, if my adventure inspires somebody else to follow a passion or to take a chance and to experiment in it, then I feel like it's worth it. It's a lot of work. I mean, you know that from putting together a podcast. It's a lot of work.
mhm.
Um, but if it means something to somebody else and inspires them, then I feel like I've done what I hope to do in sharing the stories.
Yeah, and you can tell in your writing, like it's just so thought out, and it's just your mind spilling out, and it's just, I really like reading it. I'm very engaged when I read that stuff. It makes me feel like I'm there. So
Well, that's
it's
great to hear.
I
It's one of
really
those
like
I'm like,
reading it.
am I shouting out into the void? Is there anybody out there? But it really has been interesting, and I haven't been doing it for very long. I haven't even been doing it for a year. But the slow growth is been really interesting to watch. And I think the big challenge for me getting started was kind of figuring out why I wanted to do it, and then how I want to share it, and being patient, because I know it takes time to build that following and to get people interested and inspire them. It's not a quick thing, but it has been interesting, the number of people that I know in various forms in my life, and all of a sudden, um, out of the blue, they'll ask me about it. I mean, I had a college roommate I hadn't talked to in 20, or I hadn't seen in person. I shouldn't say I hadn't talked to her. We exchanged cards and stuff. Um, but as I started getting involved with women who hike, and she was seeing me do that, she got involved and she started hiking, and now she's like totally blowing past me with what she's doing. It's awesome. But she's like, I saw you doing this and I was watching and it was really cool. And I've had a couple people say that recently, and I'm like, that's what it's about. I'm glad I'm inspiring you. That's really cool.
I love that. And I think it's just so important that to know that there are people out there. When people are reaching out to you to say that they're inspired, that's only probably pushing you more to want to do this, right?
Yeah, it does. Well, it makes me feel like what I'm doing is valuable in some way. So, again, it's that I don't want to be throwing stuff out into the void, having nobody listening to it, because that, there's 100 things I could spend my time doing. The time that I spend on the blog, I could be out hiking, but it's a way to kind of capture that and share it, and especially with people that are really important to me. I know my dad reads it. I know my son reads it. So it's kind of fun to have them see those perspectives, and I think they learn a little bit about me as well. So
yeah, that's a really special way to like build a relationship. So this has been super cool. I feel like we've like touched on a ton.
We have. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this has been awesome. I feel like we could go on a hike now and be best friends.
Maybe, right? That's how it all happens.
Right.
Now we just have to figure out where.
Exactly. The million of places we can go.
Yeah.
But is there anything else you want to add in?
I'm just so grateful. And I guess the other thing that I would add is that I would not, and I'm gonna be a little sappy, and I would not be doing what I'm doing right now if it were not for 3 men and a lady in my life. I have been so blessed with the relationship I have with Jen Tyson, who goes by Wandering Pine. She's got her own blog, who co-ambassadors women who hike with me. She's a fabulous friend and a great hiking buddy and an inspiration. But even more so, I'm so grateful for the 3 men in my life who have been my quiet cheerleaders: my dad, my son, and my boyfriend. I know they all worry about me when I'm out there, but they also, anytime anybody questions whether or not I should be out in the out of doors by myself or anything like that, they stand right behind me. And in fact, my son said recently to someone, when we were having a conversation about how it wasn't safe for me to be out there, he was like, oh, no, she knows what she's doing, and she's probably more prepared than any of the rest of us. And to have someone in your corner like that, who understands that it's a passion that feeds you and that is an advocate for you, I wouldn't be doing any of this without the 3 of them. So I'm eternally grateful for them.
I love that. That's super awesome how much they support what you're doing, and that your son stood up for you and saying that's really powerful.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm a very lucky woman. So
Yeah, really neat. Well, thank you so much, Ruth, for sharing all this with us. This has been super, super awesome to talk with you.
thank you, Sarah. It's been fantastic to talk with you as well. And we have to set up some time to hike.
Yes, it will happen.
One of the most inspiring pieces of Ruth's story, I think, is that her whole backpacking journey started with her son's Boy Scout trip, which leaped into leading women's hikes and leaped into going solo backpacking at Isle Royale. And I think that's such an awesome way that she got into her journey. And it's also really cool how age is not a factor. I mean, she got into it and she was just going for it, and I just love her story for that reason.
I think that you can kind of take away too is she really wanted to educate herself on developing the skills and pack for these trips. And, you know, before she went out on that first big Boy Scout backpacking trip, she said they did like 9 months of prep work. So she put in the time to get her body, I guess, adjusted to what a backpacking trip would be like. So yeah, just keep that in mind too, I think, is the more that you educate yourself and work on your skills, you know, the easier the activity will become and the more enjoyable you'll find it out in the wilderness. I think it was also neat how she said that, I think you had mentioned, Sarah, that you don't think you could ever do a solo trip.
Yeah, it's something I've always been a little wary of. So I look up to people who can do things like that.
And I really can relate to what Ruth said about why she finds a solo trip enjoyable and how, you know, it's not for everyone. You have to be in that right mindset of being able to be within your own thoughts and your own mind and comfortable with that for extended periods of time. And I can really relate to that, especially when I was doing my thru hike and I wasn't hesitant to go out and do it solo because I knew that I was comfortable just kind of in my own mind. Like naturally that's how I am. I'm an analytical person, so I'm always kind of more deeper in my thoughts and kind of sitting back, observing, taking things in. And so I found myself doing that a lot on the trail, is, you know, not necessarily worrying about, you know, when I'm going to get to my campsite, although there were days where it was rainy and kind of sucked and I wanted to get there quicker. But like just being able to walk down the trail and kind of like just take it all in and focus your thoughts on something else other than when am I going to be done type of mentality.
Yeah. And I like having people to bounce ideas off of and get motivation. So it's different for everyone. But we hope that you're listening to Ruth's podcast and our interview with her gave you some inspiration for getting out on the trail, maybe solo or through Women Thru Hike.
Hopefully it kind of breaks down some of those stereotypes. I mean, she mentioned how people would approach her and say, you know, you shouldn't be out there alone as a woman on the trail. It's dangerous. Yet she's proof that women can be out there solo and have a great time and not really be in any danger, or at least the danger that people speculate is out there.
Absolutely. She said she feels safer out there than anywhere else. And I think a lot of women who go out on the trails can align with that when they hike solo, from what I've heard and read from other women. So, and next time you guys get out walking or hiking, don't forget to bring a garbage bag and start picking up trash. She was a huge inspiration for that as well.
Yeah, we tend to have a lot of extra bags. We just don't always take the time to stop and pick up that piece of trash. So that's something that we can work on too, as ambassadors to this earth that we wander.
It's easy for everyone to do, so let's all make a difference and start doing it.
Yeah, so if you want to check out more about Ruth, go head on over to her website and blog, ruthsbluemarble.com. And if you're a woman who wants to get more involved in the hiking community, or wants to get started in the hiking community, or just wants some company out on the trail, go check out womenwhohike.com and check out all of the Facebook groups too that Ruth had mentioned. It sounded like there's a chapter for every state, so it sounds like there's a page, I guess, for all of those as well. So we'll have links to ruthsbluemarble.com as well as womenwhohike.com in the description of this episode. So go check it out.
Thanks for listening. Get your hike on. We love sharing these stories with you through the Hiking Through Life podcast, and we're so grateful that you listen to this podcast. If you'd like to support the Hiking Through Life podcast further, we have these amazing new t-shirts and water bottles. The t-shirts come in 4 colors, and the water bottles are perfect for trails, adventuring, or daily use. Consider checking them out at hikingthroughlife.net/shop.
Use the code PODCAST and receive 10% off your first order.
You've been listening to the Hiking Through Life podcast. Peace, love, and hike through life.